sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, strap in, everyone. Let's dive deep into something a little more out there than usual. We're not going to be talking about like the newest phones or celebrity gossip today.
Right.
We're tackling glossolalia.
Ah, yes. Speaking in tongues.
Exactly. Speaking in tongues. It's like, picture this. You're watching a horror movie, right? And instead of like yelling, "Get out!"
Yeah.
you just start babbling some crazy nonsense.
Yeah.
Or maybe things are getting, a little hot and heavy, and all of a sudden it's like you're speaking a language from another planet.
That's glossolalia in action.
Yeah. It's like your brain decides to just hit the scramble button on language, and what comes out is, let's just say interesting.
It's basically the brain's language center is kind of getting overloaded, and the crazy thing is the two main triggers for this are like intense pleasure, like during
wow.
orgasm and like extreme fear.
Really? So whether you're having the best time of your life or running for your life, you might end up sounding like a broken record player. I don't get it. What's the connection?
Well, both of those experiences, intense pleasure and fear, trigger like this flood of activity and chemicals in the brain. You can think of it like a big surge of electricity. It can overload the system, and the language centers are especially sensitive to this kind of overload.
So it's like our brains are pulling a blue screen.
In a way, yeah. Specifically during orgasm, you get this huge dopamine spike. And then with fear, you have the fight or flight response kicking in.
Oh, yeah, the fight or flight response. I remember learning about that in high school. It's like our body's emergency system, right? How does that tie into this whole speaking in tongues thing?
So when that fight or flight system is activated, your body starts prioritizing survival actions. Your heart rate goes up, you start breathing faster, blood flows to your muscles, getting ready to either fight or run.
Right.
And during that process, higher level functions like language processing can get disrupted, like put on hold for a minute.
So it's like our brains are going, forget grammar. We need to survive this.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's why people in like super stressful or dangerous situations sometimes say they make these weird sounds they didn't even know they could make.
Wow.
It's that primal instinct taking over.
Okay, so we've talked about how fear can lead to this brain overload. But what about the pleasure side of things? Like orgasm is supposed to feel good, right? Why would our brain short circuit during something so enjoyable?
It's all about that dopamine surge. During orgasm, dopamine just floods the reward centers of the brain and leads to those intense feelings of pleasure. But here's the thing. That same dopamine surge also kind of inhibits activity in the prefrontal cortex.
Wait, hold on. Remind me what the prefrontal cortex does again.
It's basically the control center of your brain. It's the part that's responsible for logic, decision-making, and controlling impulses.
Okay.
So when dopamine inhibits its activity, you basically become less inhibited, more driven by instinct and raw emotion.
Oh, so that explains why some people might just shout out the most random stuff during sex. Their filter is taking a break.
Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing is that this lowered inhibition, combined with all the sensory overload of orgasm, can lead to those involuntary, often nonsensical vocalizations.
So instead of saying, wow, that was amazing, you might end up yelling, hoochie mama, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And while it might seem weird or even funny, it actually shows how closely connected our physical and emotional experiences really are.
Okay, so we've got fear shutting down the language centers so we can survive, and pleasure doing the same thing, but for a totally different reason. It's like our brain has this weird glitch where intense experiences, whether they're good or bad, can lead to the same outcome, speaking in tongues.
Yeah, it really highlights how complex and maybe even a little quirky the human brain is.
So maybe hoochie mama isn't so crazy after all. It's just our brains doing their thing in their own weird way. But here's the question. If those sounds aren't actual words, if it's just our brains glitching out, why make any sound at all? Why not just be quiet or scream?
That's a great question. And there are actually a bunch of theories about why we make those speech-like sounds.
Okay, lay 'em on me. What are some of those theories?
One theory says it's a way for the brain to let out excess energy or tension, like a pressure valve. Another theory is that those sounds, even if they're not like real words, might be attempts at communication. Expressing emotions that are just too much for language to handle.
So like a pre-language form of expression.
Exactly. Like our brains are trying to find a way to communicate those intense feelings, even if they don't have the words for it. And then there's like the historical and cultural side of things to think about too.
Oh yeah, right. Speaking in tongues has been around forever. especially in religion, right?
Exactly. I mean, throughout history and in all these different cultures, people have said they experience glossolalia during like religious rituals and ceremonies, even just in everyday life.
So it's not just about, you know, sex and scary movies. There's like a whole spiritual dimension to it too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And what's interesting is that the same brain stuff we've been talking about, like the overload, the dopamine surge, the inhibited prefrontal cortex, all of that can be triggered by intense spiritual experiences too.
Yeah. Okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
Like, think about those really ecstatic religious experiences, the kind where people feel super overwhelmed with joy or awe or like a connection to something bigger than themselves.
Right.
Those are definitely intense emotional states.
For sure. And those states can cause similar, like, physical reactions, the racing heart, the weird breathing, the feeling of losing control.
Yeah.
It's like the brain's being pushed to its limit, and sometimes glossolalia is what happens.
It's like all roads lead to Babeltown. Whether it's pleasure, fear, or spiritual ecstasy, our brains just have this thing where they short circuit in the same way.
It really shows you that even though we like to think of ourselves as like logical people, we're really wired for these strong emotional experiences. And those experiences can sometimes just skip over our logical minds and tap into something more primal and instinctual.
So it's not just about losing control. It's about like connecting with a different part of ourselves, a part that maybe doesn't always make sense, but is still like a real part of who we are.
I think that's a really good way to put it. It's about recognizing the whole range of human experience, even the parts that seem strange or hard to explain.
Okay, so we've talked about the science, the history, the spiritual side of glossolalia, but there's a question that's been bugging me. If those sounds aren't actually words, if it's just our brains glitching out, is there like any meaning to them at all, or is it just random noise?
That's the big question, isn't it? And the truth is, there's no easy answer.
Yeah, I figured as much.
Yeah.
What are some of the different ideas people have about this?
Well, some people believe that speaking in tongues is like a gift from God,
Okay.
a way of talking to like a higher power or getting messages from the spiritual realm.
So like a direct line to the cosmos.
Right. Others see it as just a psychological thing, a way for the subconscious mind to express itself or let out pent-up emotions.
Sort of like those Freudian slips where you accidentally say what you're really thinking. But instead of a word, it's like a whole bunch of gibberish.
That's a really good way to think about it. And then there are some who think of it as a kind of creative expression, like music or art, where meaning is conveyed through sounds and rhythms instead of words.
I like that idea. It's like jazz improv.
Yeah.
You're not following a set melody, but you're still expressing yourself through sound and emotion.
Exactly. And whether or not you believe there's like a deeper meaning, there's no denying that glossolalia is a super interesting phenomenon that makes you wonder about things like language consciousness, the whole human experience.
Okay, but let's be real for a sec. Most of us probably aren't going to be like speaking in tongues in our everyday lives.
True.
But is there anything we can learn from this, even if we never experience it ourselves?
I actually think there are a few really important things to take away from this.
I'm all ears.
First, it reminds us that our brains are super complex and they don't always do what we expect. We like to think we're in control, but sometimes our emotions and instincts take over, and that's okay.
So it's a reminder to embrace the unpredictable parts of ourselves, the parts that aren't always rational.
Exactly. And second, it kind of challenges how we think about language and communication. We often see language as this really precise logical system, but glossolalia shows us that there are other ways to express ourselves, ways that might not make sense logically, but can still have a lot of meaning.
So it's like we're using a different channel of communication, one that's more about feeling than thinking.
Exactly. And finally, I think it encourages us to be more open-minded and curious about the world. There are so many mysteries out there, so many things we don't fully understand, and glossolalia is just one example of how much there is still to learn about the human brain and being human.
I don't know about you, but after this deep dive, I'm definitely a little more intrigued by this whole glossolalia thing. And maybe it's not just gibberish, after all. Maybe it's like a window into a different way of seeing the world.
That's a great way to put it. And who knows, maybe there's a little bit of the glossalist in all of us just waiting to come out.
Okay, maybe that's going a bit too far. But I do think there's something to be said for embracing those times when we can't find the words, when we're just overwhelmed with emotion and we need to let something out. Maybe those moments are more important than we realize.
Maybe they are. And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. It makes us question what we think we know, to explore the unknown and to appreciate how amazingly complex and sometimes confusing our own minds are.
You know, I think this whole deep dive has really made me see that even when we feel like we're losing control, there's still this like human connection between all of us.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And maybe instead of trying to like shut those moments down, we should try to, actually learn from them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we spend so much time trying to get our language just right, to sound smart. And like, we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But maybe there's something valuable in those raw, unfiltered ways of expressing ourselves, too.
Exactly. Glossolalia shows us that there are like other ways of communicating, other ways of just existing in the world.
Right.
And those ways, even if they seem weird or don't make sense, can still be powerful and meaningful.
For sure.
So like next time I can't find the words, whether it's from being super happy or totally terrified, maybe I'll just kind of go with it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe there's like a hidden message in all that, babbling a message I don't even realize I'm trying to send.
Maybe, or maybe it's just reminding us that we're more than just our logical minds.
Right.
We're also creatures of instinct and emotion and just pure expression.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive into glossolalia.
Yeah.
It's been a wild ride.
Yeah, this was fun. And remember, next time you hear someone speaking in tongues, don't just think of it as nonsense. There might be more to it than you think.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Until next time. Keep those brains buzzing and those tongues wagging, even if it's just gibberish.